Hi, I'm Neil Priest, and this is Dreaming of Chess Mastery, a YouTube channel that delves into the world of adult chess improvement. I want to begin by telling you a little story from my way distant past. It was January 1985. I'd just finished high school, and I'd gone to Cape Town to play in, I think, what was called the Cape Province Open. And it's nothing to do with me, this story, by the way. I didn't play very well, and I think I just enjoyed the sea air and a holiday. But my friend Bob, who'd just finished his first year of university, boy, oh boy, he amazed us all. He'd more or less disappeared for the long summer holiday. And he'd come back, started the tournament, and he was a reasonable player, sort of in the 1800s. From a very strong chess-playing family, actually. His father had represented South Africa in a chess Olympiad way back when South Africa was still playing chess Olympiads. In the 80s, we were very much banned for good reasons. Anyway, Bob came from a good, strong chess tradition, but as I say, he was an 1800-ish player, reasonable enough, but nothing special. But this tournament, he just astonished everyone. I can't remember if he actually won it or tied for first. Certainly his tournament performance was in the region of 2300. And very quickly his rating shot up from, let's say, 1850 to 2150. And we were all astonished. I mean, and it wasn't a fluke. You know, you watched him playing these games against very handy opposition, and he was just demolishing them. Strategic masterpiece. So eventually we asked him, you know, what's the secret? He said, well, I read a book. You read a book? We've all read a book. He said, no, I read my system, Nimzovich. And of course, we'd all heard of my system, even in South Africa. It was the classic of classics. And indeed, many of us had taken it out the public library. I certainly hadn't, and I'd read it. That didn't just add on 300 points to my playing strength overnight. There must be more to it than that. He said, no, I read it. And then he explained how he read it and how much he read it. And the truth was, he'd spent the best part of 10 weeks studying that book inside and out. I imagine he must have spent anywhere between 5 and 10 hours a day, pretty much every day, picking the book apart until he felt he understood every last word. And it showed in his play. I mean, he went from being a solid, cautious, slightly timid sort of player to, as I say, playing these very profound sort of games full of, obviously, prophylaxis. Dominating the 7th rank and the bishop pair. You know, all that lovely Nimzovich stuff was there in spades in his game. And he was playing sort of queenside fianchetto openings, which I don't think he'd done before. It had completely revolutionized his chess. And perhaps if you have carefully thought about the title, you might think I'm about to suggest, well, that's what all of us adult chess improvers need to do. We all need to go on a deep dive into Nimzovich's My System. And nothing could be further from the truth. Although I'm not saying don't do that, but don't specifically study my system. My point is not that it's one specific book that is going to unlock the key to your chess. Rather, it is the intensity that you bring, the consistency and the willpower to reading the key book of your choosing. And that book will vary depending on a range of factors, although I'll give some thoughts on it in a moment. Obviously, if you're 1400 or if you're 2000, the book that you need to study will be very, very different. And also, your own personal interests, your strengths and weaknesses may lead you to study a different sort of book. But whatever that book is, it needs to be a book that can be studied with the intensity, the depth, the reflection that Bob brought to studying my system. So it could be an opening book, it could be an ending book, a middle game, it could be a game collection, a tournament book, end game studies. That will depend very much on you, as I say. But it needs to be a book of substance, of depth. And although there are many critics of my system now, and vigorous defenders, there's no doubt that it meets those criteria. Perhaps it's a little dated. It is, after all, the best part of 100 years old. And the language, certainly in the English translation, Bell, that I read, is, it's not just quaint because Nimzowitsch was a pretty weird guy, but it's probably a little stilted because of the translation. Perhaps reading Alex Fishbein's new sort of reinterpretation, reworking of my system would be the way to go. But whatever book it is, criteria number one is that it needs to be a profound work, given the level that you're playing on. And there are profound works that have been written pretty much for every stage of chess beyond the very beginnings. And I say that you need to study it deeply. Well, how long and how much? Obviously, a lot will depend on the time that you have available. But the kind of deep dive that Robert did, I would imagine, requires anywhere between 30 and 300 hours. So a shorter book, perhaps a month, an hour a day, will get you to the end of it and sort of uncork the secrets, let the genie out of the bottle. But I suspect if it's a really good book, it will be worthy of far more study than that. Let's take as an example Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games. And let us just imagine for a moment, these are classical games, that Fischer spent on average 4 or 5 hours on each game. This is Bobby Fischer we're talking about. So then take the game, read his notes, flip through it in 20 minutes. You haven't really got anywhere near to plumbing the depths of the game. Fischer, when he reviewed those games, would have spent hours and hours. And that's coming from one of the greatest players of all time and someone who had actually played the game. So he'd already spent, as I say, 4 or 5 hours of deep thought on the moves. And you're going to just dismiss them in 30 minutes? I don't think so. That's not the way forward. So what I am talking about is finding this sort of rich material